So yesterday we spoke about Yehuda's taking responsibility for himself in the form of admitting to what he did, telling the brothers we can't do anything that we're not willing to take responsibility for. When we spoke about responsibility, it was a matter of understanding that you don't blame others, you don't live in some fantasy world, you don't live in denial. You've got to understand both for yourself as well as answering to others. You've got to be honest, real. The next step in Yehuda is taking responsibility not just for himself, but in this particular case, that of the family, and that's Yehuda with Yosef, really with Yehuda with Binyamin. Later in the story, they have no idea where Yosef is, but whoever this ruler in Egypt was, demanded that Binyamin come. Yaakov Avinu refused. And Yehuda is the one that took responsibility for bringing Binyamin, that he's going to take him back. And then ultimately, when Binyamin is falsely accused of stealing the goblet, Yehuda is the one that steps in, willing to be imprisoned instead of him. And when it's not accepted, Yehuda is the one that actually confronts Yosef to the point that he just had to reveal himself, that he is Yosef. Now, what is this responsibility? This is not responsibility for the world, but it's responsibility for the family. And this involves another kind of responsibility. The responsibility we've been discussing is the responsibility for what you did, taking responsibility for your actions. Here it's being responsible. Very interesting when you learn through Rashi or the Rishonim, you look at exactly what Yehuda's way of going about things was. Beginning with Yaakov Avinu, who was all upset. The brothers went to Egypt. He's never really gotten over Yosef's disappearance. The brothers come back, this time without Shimon, and requesting Binyamin. And Yaakov Avinu refused to deal with it. He would not allow Binyamin to go down to Egypt. So Rashi says there, Yehuda says, let's wait. Wait until there's no food in the house. Our father will then have to revisit the situation. And that's what happened. Taking responsibility means understanding what's going on, understanding what has to be done, and taking the time, patience, and of course, developing the strategy for making it happen. This is taking responsibility for everything in our lives. Again, I'm not talking about our previous actions. Taking responsibility to see to it that everything that has to be done is taken care of. In the best way possible. Here it's Yehuda taking responsibility for the family. We have to get Shimon back. We also have to get food. Yaakov Avinu refuses. This is not time for a battle. Let time do its thing. There'll be no food left. Yaakov Avinu will be willing to revisit it. Thinking things through, getting the whole picture. And at that point, Yehuda then tells his father, I am taking eternal responsibility for Binyamin And indeed, he follows through on that to the very end. So the second trait is taking real responsibility for oneself, for one's family, for oneself, everything that you really have to get done. As a Jew, it means taking care of all of your midos, taking responsibility for them, knowing that nobody else is going to be able to take responsibility for your growth. Any issues you've got to deal with. Taking responsibility for your learning, for what it is that you have to know as a Jew. And although like here we take a little more responsibility than most other places in terms of giving you a well-rounded Jewish education, there's still so much that you've got to learn, and if you don't take personal responsibility for it, it's just not going to happen. Taking responsibility in terms of your livelihood, I'm not talking about amassing large sums of money. Understanding that you're living responsibly, both in seeing to it that there's income, as well as seeing to it that your spending is appropriate for your income level. Taking responsibility for your family. Anything that you feel has to be done and is not getting taken care of. You've got to work through, are you the right person to take care of it? And what is the strategic way to take care of it? Being wise. In the Kuzari, he speaks of the Chassid, the one who lives by what Hashem commanded. He speaks of him as a moshel, which in modern Hebrew is translated as a governor. It's like taking responsibility for a city. There are so many different aspects of whom we are that always have to be addressed. You cannot neglect a single one of them. Whether it's your physical health, your emotional health, you can't neglect anything. Anything that you neglect is going to come back to haunt you. Being responsible doesn't mean that you go overboard. No, you don't have to be a health nut. Whether or not you actually have to go running for an hour a day is questionable. But you've got to take care of your health. Your emotional health as well. You've got to take responsibility for it. Yes, so it's your physical health, your emotional health, your midos, your finances, your lifestyle. Of course, your goals in life. I would hope they're important things you want to live for. Making sure that you are preparing yourself for that. This is simple responsibility. This is a prerequisite. You can't lead if you're not a responsible person, and responsibility begins with taking responsibility for yourself and for the people that you have responsibility for naturally, such as family. Now, there's always a question. People in leadership positions that don't take responsibility for themselves, to what degree can you trust that they're really taking responsibility for everybody else? To what degree can you assume that the directives they're giving were thought through and they are indeed responsible? There are people like that in leadership positions. But then you can't just take their word for it. Because it's obvious that they don't know how to take responsibility for you. And they may be very good at inspiring, but they're not going to be taking responsibility. The test of responsibility is for oneself. Anyone who neglects taking care of their basic needs, again, their physical health, emotional health, their finances, someone who is naturally reckless, but finds himself in a position of leadership, his leadership can be nothing more than inspiration. One cannot trust that the decisions being made are responsible ones. Because this is not a responsible human being. For yourselves, if you want to be leaders, you have to first take responsibility for yourselves. Take care of all of your needs, but weigh one out against the other. So, for example, you want to take care of your health, so you're going to work out every day. How much time is that going to take? At what expense is that going to come? True, you have to take care of your health. You also have to become a Talmid Chacham. How do you do both? It's doable, but I don't think the answer is to work out for hours daily. Same story with finances. Making sure that you take responsibility, but not to the extent that it comes at the expense of all the other areas of your growth. So an essential part of taking responsibility is making sure that you're not taking responsibility just for specific things, but you're getting that whole picture. This is the moshel, the governor, that the Kuzari describes the chassid to be. When to be a leader, you have to know how to look at the totality of what is necessary. Where you have to cut corners, where you cannot afford to cut corners. One of the great tests Hashem gives us in this world is the fact that there are so many different things to take care of, and we have to prioritize without canceling anything. We have to deal with everything, but we have to decide to what degree. How much do you invest in one thing when it comes at the expense of something else? Because everything does. The thing we have the least of is time. It's time. It's headspace. And yes, means how much you invest in what. And it's a constant decision. It's not a one-time thing. This is something that has to be constantly reevaluated. This is all part of being responsible. Leadership means you're willing to take responsibility for others. You can't do that if you don't know how to take responsibility for yourselves. It's not a rocket science. It just takes a lot of thinking. It means not neglecting anything. Taking responsibility for the totality of every aspect of your life and the people around you that you are responsible for as well. To do things wisely, strategically, with patience. You hear this story, with patience. Shimon is imprisoned in Egypt. Eventually, they're going to run out of food. Let's take our time. Let's take our time as a strategy, as a strategic decision. We're not talking about procrastinating. We're not talking about putting something off because it's an uncomfortable conversation that's going to have to take place. It's strategy. So yes, Yehuda, who was the granddaddy of Melucha, of kingdom in Klal Yisrael, he A, takes responsibility for his actions, B, takes responsibility for himself and his family. And then look at the degree. Personal responsibility. Leaders are often accused of living in their ivory towers and being detached from reality and never making themselves really vulnerable. Taking responsibility means rolling up your sleeves. Taking responsibility means you put yourself out physically. You're just willing to sit in prison instead of Binyamin. And then Yehuda actually confronts this ruler in Egypt. He didn't know it was his brother. To the point that his life was at stake. Taking responsibility means you stop at nothing. Personal involvement in taking responsibility. I am responsible. So it sounds like it's vast. It is vast. It is vast. And every one of us has this responsibility. But if you want to be a leader, you better live up to it. You don't want to be a leader, you still have to live up to it. But if you want to be a leader, if you don't, you're disqualifying yourself. No, the truth of the matter is, we know Hashem runs the world and Hashem takes care of us. Why do we have to be so responsible? Why do we have to be so involved in taking responsibility for every aspect of our lives? Hashem takes care of us. In reality, it's all from Him. However, we're being tested. Are we being responsible or not? And if you're irresponsible, you deserve what you get. If you're irresponsible, then who says Hashem's going to deliver? If you could have done better, true. Shomer Psayim Hashem, Hashem takes care of the fools. If you know any better, you're not a fool, and there's no guarantee. Meaning, in reality, all of our responsibilities are only there for the sake of us taking responsibility for them. It's the test of whether or not we rise to the occasion and take responsibility for them. That's the reality of it. So certainly you've got to. And getting back to leadership. Yehud is the one that this is pointed out in. Yehud is the one that took responsibility for the family. I mean, to the extent of putting his life on the line. He is Yehuda, from which the kingdom in Israel comes. It's very, very clear. Leadership means you are a responsible person. A responsible person is someone who takes full responsibility for every aspect of his existence, his growth, all of his goals. with lots of wisdom, patience, tact, and that includes his family as well. You got it? So far, taking responsibility in terms of responsibility for your actions, and second, taking responsibility for yourself. Okay.